to hear less from me over the course of this evening, but we're in line for a really fantastic conversation with one of our really key and powerful colleagues, comrades, and members of the Dignity in Schools campaign. Of course, DSC is a national member-led organization that focuses on education justice and organizing, dismantling the school to prison pipeline. But kind of beyond those like broad contours of education justice organizing, it is really trying to facilitate what education at its core is really about, which is facilitating, nurturing, and developing responsible handlers of power in our communities, being able to coalesce and perpetuate and develop the kinds of networks and relationship building and curiosities and space for communities of care to coexist and to thrive. We have members from California to New York to Chicago, where I'm based at, to all throughout the South, to Virginia, to the DMV area, and each of these areas, and more importantly, each of these members that we work with, really have a unique area of focus, a grounded area of focus on their work. And that is really what makes the coalition at large really special and important in these times where there's so much effort to dismantle and to disaggregate and to disconnect communities together as we're being oppressed across the land. And so this conversation that we're dealing with tonight is going to be an intergenerational conversation. We're excited to talk about a report that's going to be released on the Dignity in Schools website very soon, called Advocating While Black Parents' Experiences with Special Education in Virginia. It's a fresh new report that's put together by some of the folks that you're going to meet later on in this discussion. But what I want to do to get us started is just kind of give us a brief frame, and I'm gonna close my mouth and pass it to the very capable hands of Cheryl Poe and kind of let the conversation go on from there. And so, if you'll bear with me for a second, I want to give us a little bit of this framing. So, for generations, Black families have carried the weight of ensuring that their children receive what the law already promises. When disability intersects with race, that weight becomes heavier. Navigating special education is never just about paperwork, policies, or procedural safeguards. Again, is the treatment consistent with the ideology? You can say anything, but is the treatment consistent with that? For Black parents, it often means navigating bias, senses of lower expectations, disproportionate discipline, delayed evaluations, and systems that question their credibility before honoring their expertise. This gathering marks the release of findings from Advocating While Black, which we just mentioned earlier. It's a study rooted in the lived realities of Black families navigating systems governed by the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA. The research does more than document disparities. It captures patterns of resistance, resilience, exhaustion, strategy, and love. Advocating While Black is not a metaphor. It is a lived condition. It is the reality of preparing for meetings twice as hard, documenting every interaction, anticipating pushback, and still showing up grounded in the belief and the knowledge that our children deserve dignity, access, and affirmation. It is the experience of being viewed as angry instead of informed, difficult instead of determined, and yet continuing to push forward because the stakes for our children, our people, and ultimately our communities is too high not to. This intergenerational conversation brings together advocates and parents whose stories reflect both struggle and strategy. It centers the voices of those who have navigated evaluations, IEP meetings, disciplinary hearings, and service gaps, and who have learned how to build collective power in the process. It reminds us that advocacy is not simply reactionary, it's structural, cultural, and communal. Families, educators, organizers, and allies are invited into this space with clarity and purpose, and I would add to that curiosity. This is a moment to listen deeply, to listen and learn strategically, to connect across generations and geography, and to strengthen the support infrastructure that Black neurodivergent children and students deserve. This is about dignity, it's also about access, and it's about collective responsibility. I think a lot about the political prisoner and journalist Mumia Abu-Jamal, and he often says, if we say that our children are lost, it is our responsibility to go get them. And so in this time, I think that it's just a very important thing that as so many things are changing, as the landscape is constantly, seemingly falling apart, we also are bearing witness to like the incredible organization and resilience and radicalization and stepping up to the moment of students, of teachers. Shout out to the strikers that just finished their strike in San Francisco, maybe about a week and a half ago. And so, folks are not just taking oppression laying down. Folks are stepping up and standing up every day. And what makes this conversation so important is the ways in which, beyond those spectacular and historical moments, the kind of quiet, structural, but equally violent interventions and moments that the same system that we're fighting on the streets has in meeting rooms and in classrooms and in IEP meetings. And so we're going to pull up some of that back, but also talk about how we deal with it. And so with that, I'm going to toss it to the very capable hands of Cheryl Poe. Cheryl, the floor is yours. And again, everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat or use the Q&A feature in this webinar. And again, if you are interested in sharing this with other people, do not hesitate to share the link on your social media, through your emails and all that kind of stuff, so that as many people as possible can participate in the discussion with us. And with that, Cheryl, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. What a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much, Tafari and Dignities in School, for giving us this opportunity to share our report with you. And I'm going to jump into it. Let me get it up. Okay. Can you guys just confirm that you are able to see this PowerPoint? Yes, by saying something. Thumbs.
Yes, we can.
They can see
Yes,
it.
we can
Okay,
see.
great. So let's just start off by introducing and talking about all the original people that have really helped us with the research. So advocating for kids, we were able to partner with Catherine Wiley, who's not here with us this evening, and come up with a great protocol, a great report, and bring together ideas about what needs to be done for children with disabilities. So that's been exciting. Then we had Leah. She was a researcher. She's not with us, from ODU, that she also helped, and also Jamelia. And then with us we have to Bibia. I always call her Miss Jones. I said it perfect earlier. Tribua, help me out. I'm so sorry. Pronounce your name for me, just because
It's Tribuana.
Tribuana. Oh, I swear. And she's here with us tonight. And then we also have Brianna Gibson, who also helped with the interviews. So these were the original researchers. They have been working on this for, I'd say, about 3 years overall, right? Miss Gibson? Is that about right? Yeah, for 3 years.
It's been about 3 years since we
Yeah.
connected.
Yeah. So we're just really excited to have it done. And we're really excited that it's going to be on the Dignities in School website when we're done. I'm just going to talk about briefly what you're going to learn today. So we're going to start off with some introductions and why this research is important. You'll hear from me, you'll hear from the parents. From there, we're going to go into what the research design was, some overall top level findings, and then we're going to talk about the implications of the research for the families. We're going to have the parents discuss why this, again, like what the report meant for them. And then we definitely have saved time for Q&A. So we're going to start off right away with the parents. Up first, I would like to briefly introduce them to you. We have Crystal and Justin Goins, and then we have Tiffany Smith. And they're going to start off from their perspective as parents to share why this research was important to them.
Are we unmuted? Oh. Sorry, my husband keeps touching the screen. Oh, can you hear me? Okay. When Ms. Poe asked me to do this, she told me what the topic was going to be, and I thought it was important to first say what special education is to me. It's testing, it's appointments, therapies, 504s and IEPs, and really understanding what they mean. Because when I started this journey, I did not know the difference between a 504 and an IEP, but I understood they both gave accommodations. It's asking for an assessment and being told no, hearing, having the testing that you waited months for, some people over years for, to get dismissed and to be told that your child is just stubborn and they just don't want to do any work. It's finally getting the school's testing finished and having a meeting where they say, we don't see anything concerning. And they have poorly written assessments that don't really show what is going on with your child. And it's getting an IEP and finding out your child is not getting services after you fought for almost a year for them to have specialized education, and then to find out in a meeting that my child is refusing to go, which again, why is she refusing to go? Because behavior is communication. And then the reason it's important to me is because it shows how hard it is for Black parents to receive FAPE for their kids. And Black parents have similar stories in this report, issues, concerns, and our kids are paying the price while we sit in meetings and hit continued roadblocks just by trying to help our children. And for content, I started a second IEP for my second daughter in October, and we still have not finished finalized, and she is not getting specialized education. And the school year is almost over.
For me, is being able to support, help support my wife, take care of my daughters, as far as this process, as far as special education. And also the research is important because it highlights how even today Black students are often disciplined more harshly for the same behaviors as that of a different race, which means more suspensions, expulsions, definitely loss of instructional time, and increased risk of academic struggle and dropout. And also putting labels on these children too of being aggressive, difficult, and angry, which they're not.
They're just misunderstood.
That's all it is.
I'm Tiffany Smith. This research was so important to me because I'm a product of educators. I grew up in a home with a parent who was a teacher of the year in two different states. I have daughters who have, my oldest daughter has a master's degree. I have another daughter who is an Ivy League student on a full scholarship. I have my third oldest daughter just recently won a major national scholarship as a middle schooler. And then I get to my youngest daughter, and she's being characterized as angry, violent, a bully, and that's just not our experience of her at home. And I went to the school for help because they were seeing things that I wasn't seeing in my daughter. And I was met with ineffective IEPs. I was met with suspensions of my daughter. My daughter was suspended so many times I can't even count. Um, I was met with a characterization of my daughter of having anger issues, that she probably needed intensive in-home therapy because she was such a discipline problem. And, being that these are professionals that we rely on, our children spend the majority of the day with them, and that they couldn't see that my child was a child who was struggling and needed different types of support was foreign to me because, like I said, my mother was teacher of the year. So I've seen that side of the education system, but I had never experienced this other side that I was seeing, that I was being met with for my youngest daughter. And then I knew that there were other parents out there that were experiencing what I was experiencing. In fact, when I met the Goins, our stories are almost cardboard replicas of one another. So it's a systematic thing. It's not just a random occurrence in our system. It's very systematic. And I thought that this research is important so that we could get this information out to other parents who are going through the same situation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that and being very vulnerable about your experiences. I think, you know, one of the pieces I've learned so much more since I've done this research. And one of the things that in doing the research and like sharing these reports is the vulnerability it took for parents to be a part of this. Because it's not hard to say. I mean, it's hard to say. My child gets suspended all the time from school. I mean, nobody wants to brag about that. That's not something that you brag about, right? But your honesty about that helps us understand that the things we hear about and we read about in other research, you're the faces of it. Your personal stories represent what we read and research, and to then be a part of a research project, I just want to say thank you again for being part of this for us. So I'm gonna move into now. You guys know me, I'm Cheryl Poe. So I'm not a researcher, not qualified to do that, but our agency, the nonprofit, the organization partnered with Howard and Dr. Wiley. So what our role was to find parents and help with the development of looking at the protocols and information. So I'm going to share why the research was so important to get started in the first place for me. And it goes all the way back before, right, integration. This research is important to me because we've always known, we've always been told separate but not equal is not good for us. And this research, to me, almost gives us another pause around why can't we just have the funding to fund our own, to educate our own. But let's talk about what has happened to get us here. So Charles Hampton Houston, which is one of my favorite attorneys and civil rights leaders, and he's from Howard, right? And what he did before integration occurred was he collected stories and visual stories, and also in interviewing people. And what he found that in the South, and especially in the South, that the educational opportunities for Black kids was horrible from a perspective of a lot of times they had to walk miles on unpaved road because they didn't have school buses like their white counterparts. And you can see that in the first file. You see him and some students in the second file, in the second picture, I'm sorry, where, they would have rooms, not even full, say, school buildings. But rooms where everyone would be put in there and not and not have the same kinds of materials, resources, and tools to even teach the kids. Black students received, or the Black teachers received, tossed out old books that weren't being used anymore. Black educators were not being paid equal, not even close to equal in pay to what white educators, white administrators, I mean, Black administrators and principals. It's one of the things that we forget when it was separate, even though it wasn't equal. It was us doing the very best that we could to give our kids some information, opportunities to learn. And in many cases, even with less, we thrived, right? So I think the research is important because we have to re-examine, especially now, have an opportunity to re-examine how we think about integration. And what are our options now? After integration, of course, you all know white rage. To this day, the same white rage exists in many states when it comes to the integration and having Black students in school. So let's think about this just for a minute. Just think about this. If they felt that way just because you were Black, imagine if you were Black and neurodivergent. Imagine. Life would have been hell for you. It's horrible. And a lot of what we're seeing in the past is happening again. Where are our white civil rights? I've heard that. People post some of the most disgusting thing on my page when I talk about Blackness and students with disabilities and how that intersectionality causes harm because racism still exists in our system and our kids aren't seen as valued individuals at all. So what happened was we started off like, oh, look, it was 2024. That was the first year that I met Dr. Wiley. And what we did was I asked her, I said, I'm really concerned. Virginia has never, since they opened schools and allowed Black children to attend schools, have Black children been, through their data collection systems that we know of, they've always been overrepresented in all the negative things, like Justin said earlier. Always. overrepresented in discipline, right? And always not represented in high graduation rates or giftedness or twice giftedness skills. So she took all the information and data that had already exist to look at some trends before we started the research, just to get an idea on what is some of the things that we wanted to look at. So one of the things that we found out, these were 7 trends that we found out that existed through the data, and it's there. The information is horrible. Virginia's what 11th highest count in the nation when it came to suspending kids nationally. That's ridiculous. Why are our kids being suspended? And when we say kids being suspended, you're talking about Black kids. Black students continue to be overrepresented in out of school suspension multiple years, and that means um, if your child's suspended when they're in the first grade, it seems that it gets tracked, and somehow children continue to be suspended all the way through until something is put in place to stop it. We know one of the things I really want to talk about represents some of my clients is Black girls. When we think of special education, a lot of times, when we think of suspension overall, you're always told about Black boys are overrepresented in special ed, Black boys are overrepresented in being suspended. But guess what? Black girls are doing the same thing when you compare them to white girl counterparts. They're suspended way more, twice as much as their white counterparts. They're still not accessing the resources and opportunities that we have. And we really need to lift up their struggles, Black girls, as much as we do our Black boys. Students with disabilities continue to be overrepresented in out of school suspension. So think about it again. If you're just Black, you're going to be overrepresented in suspensions. If you have a disability, Black or white, you're overrepresented in suspensions. And if you are Black with a disability, you're overrated in every area in suspensions. It's almost like the system, as soon as you come in and you're Black and you have a disability, you're going to get suspended or disciplined in some way. The system is set up like that. Let's see. Virginia suspends even preschoolers, right? Preschoolers. I don't know why you would suspend a 5-year-old. I've like looked at the data around this. I even have cases where 5-year-olds are being suspended. I had a student that was suspended earlier this school year because he eloped. Now he's 5 and he's out on recess. Why is it his fault? Why does he get suspended for them losing him, basically? And that's another thing. Some of these suspensions, it's easier for the school to document it as a behavioral issue on the child or the child being non-compliant versus in accepting accountability and responsibility for the situation for which the child was put in the first place that led to the suspension. So, and I'm talking to the choir here. I would believe that a majority of the people that are watching this or signed up for this understand that yes, institutional racism is still alive, and that institutional racism is allowed to exist not because of your overt, right? Your overt racism that exists, the bombing of a church, right? Or throwing stones at a Black family. No, it's the quiet racism, right? It's the racism that allows policies to be developed and institutionalized and pushed forward that allow Black people, Black kids to continue to suffer and be seen as less than and not valued and treated with the dignity that they deserve. So, that is why this report is so important to me, because it allows me to highlight and discuss what is currently happening and then do something about it. Because all the research that Virginia has done, it never really included the voices of Black people. And we're the ones that are most impacted by the system. So now we're going to move into the part where you're going to hear more technical information about the research. And I'd love to introduce Brianna Gibson. She has just been a wonder and a joy to work with. I'm so glad I got a chance to know her, meet her, and work with her. And Brianna, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Poe. Again, my name is Brianna Gibson. I am a special education administrator. I'm currently the director at Achieve Kids Non-Public Schools in Palo Alto, California. My background and journey, I was interested in psychology, found my way to Howard University to get my master's in educational leadership in policy. And that's where I really honed in on my specialty of supporting policy and practices for alleviating disproportionality for African American students in special education, as well as honing in on crisis intervention and safety models that are integrated approaches for supporting students with behavioral crisis in the school system. And so that's kind of where my niche lands. And I've been lucky to work with Ms. Poe for the last 3 years on this project. I was the third to join the team after Ms. Poe and Dr. Wiley were able to come together. Dr. Wiley reached out since she was my previous teacher, and she knew I was definitely passionate in special education and had that background. And so very grateful for Dr. Wiley for collaborating and connecting me and Ms. Poe as well. So a little bit about the research and diving into the mechanics of the research. So when I was joined to this team, Ms. Poe and I and Dr. Wiley were able to really sit down and hash out what exactly do we want to know from our parents in the Virginia public school system, specifically our Black parents with neurodivergent children. And so these were the 3 research questions that we were able to use to guide our understanding of what was happening in the climate for special education in Virginia and the experiences of Black parents. So we first question is, what experiences do Black parents have navigating public schools and special education systems? What advocacy strategies do Black parents use to advocate these systems? And what are these impacts of these systems on Black parents? So we really wanted to get a full encompassment of not only, of not only their parents' backgrounds and experiences, but truly what they were doing to support their student, as well as what the district was and was not doing for the parent and the family. And so we are going to, yep, methods, perfect. We are going to dive into the type of methodology we use for this research. And so our research design was a qualitative study using semi-structured interviews. That means that we took the time to really analyze all of the interviews, transcribe them via writing, and really coded them to figure out the different themes that all parents were talking about throughout all of the interviews. So we had 21 Black and African American parents in Virginia, and the focus was their parent experiences with special education systems and advocacy strategies. So the interviews ranged from around an hour to 90 minutes. And then it was conducted by university researchers, myself, Dr. Wiley, and a couple of other researchers included. For the instrumentation, again, to reiterate, these interview protocols were a collaboration between Ms. Poe advocating for kids, Dr. Wiley, as well as other experts to support with ensuring that there was high inter-rater reliability. And so inter-rater reliability, if you guys aren't too savvy with research, that just means that everyone's getting the same answers. So if I give you these questions and you go ask SPED parents, you're getting the same kind of answers that I'm getting, right? They match up. That's what inter-rater reliability means. And so what we did was we used those audio files and analyzed them, transcribed them, and we also used the qualitative software called Deduce, which is able, like an AI system, which is able to really pull out certain themes that were highlighted for all of the teacher or for all of the parent interviews. And then we combined deductive and inductive coding, which means we talked about broad topics and really narrowed them down. And then we also talked about really specific topics as well, and allow them to parents to generalize based off that really specific question. So that's kind of what the deductive and inductive coding means. And so with this, we, again, this was a collaboration between Advocating for Kids and Howard. University. We conducted 20 qualitative semi-structured interviews of African American and Black parents, specifically those who are navigating the special education system. And so the way we defined navigating is you either had to have sought services for your kid or your student has is eligible for services. So if you're not really familiar with the special education process, you might have been a part of an evaluation and eligibility process, but you've never been actually placed in special education. So we really honored that range of exposure that parents would have to the special education system, and we acknowledged that some parents may have sought services, but not have gotten, may not have received eligibility for those services. We also specifically honed in on children with autism and ADHD, and the region that we highlighted was the Virginia, Tidewater, Richmond, Northern Virginia region. And then to support with confidentiality, there's going to be a lot more redaction within the research to support, parents' amazing and bold and creative ways of explaining their struggles with dealing with that with the special education system, and also the way that they personally advocate for their students. So go into the overall findings. So again, we had a couple different lenses. That first lens was parental advocacy strategies used. So we really wanted to hone in on that, just Black adversity. We know that our parents are going through a lot, but we also know our parents, Black kids, we're going to do what we need to do to get our kids to where they need to be, right? And so we wanted to acknowledge the fact that we know that they're using strategies. Are these strategies working due to the public school system? We don't know, but we know there are strategies. We know they're using them, even if they're not working due to other issues and barriers that we'll highlight again. And so one would be seeking information to inform parent decision making. That was expressed a lot throughout different avenues. So seeking information via online, via other people, via different organizations, different partnerships, and different things like that. Two was pursuing non-school-based professional evaluations and assessments. And so essentially understanding that as a right to a parent, you have the right to an alternative evaluation and assessment for your child. And so once parents are able to get more information and understand that, they're able to support with understanding that they have that right to request for different interventions. And we see throughout this research that parents are asking for that right. And also as well as countering school decisions that felt odd with their child's well-being. That was consistent throughout the entire interview process. And then holding schools and district leaders accountable for providing special education services. I believe the Goins family kind of highlighted that earlier as well in regards to, fighting for their kids to have those services. And it's an annual IEP. So once a year they go over that IEP. And so they fought for those services. By that next IEP, those services are supposed to be given, and it was a whole year where they found out it wasn't. And so they really are consistently having to advocate and fight for their right to hold those leaders accountable for providing the services that are on that IEP. And then often, as a last resort, hiring professional special education advocates, pursuing legal means of redress through government civil rights agencies, and disenrolling from schools. And so that's kind of that final process of understanding for parents once they we're seeing the trends of once parents seek out that information for themselves, that is not supporting their student. So they have to take their means even further in hiring an advocate to support their student's education. Awesome. And so similarly, we found their experiences when dealing with the special education system, a lot of it was very negative. And so school-based challenges parents experienced included lack of services and inadequate implementation of IEPs. So essentially services would be speech language pathology, behavioral health, mental health therapy sessions. It would also be OT services and speech language pathology, and different things like that. The lack of services in those areas to support with the overall academic supports of that student and overall well-being of that student. And then the inadequate implementation of that IEP as well. So So, we go over this document, the parents are advocating, fighting for all of this information to be put on that document, and the document is not being met with fidelity, and they are not implementing what they are saying they are implementing, even though we went through the process of figuring out what to put on that IEP and all of us signing it. We also see feeling unheard during IEP meetings. There was a lot of different trends of feeling that the meetings were cold, feeling that they were very routine, mechanic even. A lot of them felt like the IEP meeting a was more of a compliance and law driven meeting where we were thinking of that aspect rather than a positive meeting where we're able to talk about the students' growth. And things like that. And then Miss Smith and the Goins family also highlighted that as well in their family testimonial. And then lastly, frequent adverse disciplinary experiences for children stemming from IEP or disability-related circumstances. Similarly to what Ms. Poe and the families were saying, disciplinary experiences for students with IEPs are very common. And so understanding that when you are in special education, you are frequently involved with disciplinary actions at school, and our parents were also noticing that as well within our study. And then racial discrimination and hostility from school staff and personnel. And so essentially, the parents felt that there was different waves of covert and overt types and forms of racism that they experienced throughout the IEP process. A lot of times, we had some parents that spoke on the lack of communicating with the parent specifically, and IEP team members only speaking with advocates. We've had reports of one parent being spoke to more frequently than the other in meetings due to racial differences as well as gender differences. And then we also see a lack of school communication overall between the parents and the school district to support their students with IEPs. And so we're going to dive a little deeper into the school-based challenges and kind of give you some examples. So overall, parents interviewed, of the parents interviewed, half had children who had been suspended one, if not multiple times. While other parents found that their child had not been suspended, or the reason they have not been suspended is because their parents successfully challenged the school appropriately. And most of the parents that said that they challenged the school successfully all had advocates to support with that challenge. Another trend we found in this research was that most parents thought that the school district would not take them seriously until they had that advocate. So that was a good one to know too. An example quote from one of our parents, again, confidential, so the names are definitely pseudonyms. "I can't keep track of how many times he was suspended. I can probably say he was getting suspended at least once a month, almost. Then COVID hit. That was a relief because he was back home. But he probably got suspended more than 5, 6, 7 times. Whether it was an in-school suspension or an out-of-school suspension, it was always suspension." Mrs. Allen. And so this was a common trend for all of our parents was that suspension, getting that phone call home, was always happening weekly, if not daily, that their child was having some type of behavioral problem or issue that the school could not figure out. And so they would have to pick up their child because the school was not able to support the behaviors or whatever situation was happening on campus. I will pass it over to Tribuana, my amazing peer in this research project.
Thank you, Brianna. I appreciate you. Hi, everyone. My name is Tribuana Jones once again, and I am a doctoral student at Howard University, and also I'm a current high school teacher for a District of Columbia Public Schools, as well as Chicago Public Schools, which is I am a Chicagoan at heart. So right now, in my third year of my program at Howard University, my research pretty much centers around Black adolescents and how they grapple with their faith. As it pertains to Christianity in public education and how they negotiate that when dealing with educational racism and adversity. So I will pick up where Brianna left off with the findings, and we will start off with impacts on Black parents. So With this research, with the dynamics of Black parents and pretty much everything they experience, we could imagine that, as they are advocating for their children, for their babies, that they are going through so many circumstances, right? So some of these things could look like economic costs, like they are coming out of pocket for tutoring, for some parents even relocated to new neighborhoods just to get their students, their children, the proper schooling and support. And also maybe some parents, due to having to leave work for their children, they lost wages, because a lot of the parents, some of them have worked hourly and they had to leave work to pick up their children due to suspension and things like that. So also, we have a lot of parents also have like this emotional health toil as well too. So we could imagine that parents had to go through anxiety and exhaustion, also disrupted family life when it comes to the impacts of Black parents as well. And that and then we understand that when schools fail, families have to usually take a finance gap, right? When they are going to tutoring, when they are dealing with these mental health and physical things, when they have to pay for therapists and things of that nature. So when we're looking at the impacts of Black parents, it's not only just economic, but it's also into the family life and as it pertains to mental health. And these are just some quotes that we can just look at, right? So we have Miss Sanders that says she spent thousands last year alone. Just last year, it cost her $2,500, and he's now in the 5th grade, her son. And so it cost her thousands with tutoring, and she was spending like almost $500 a month for private tutoring. And Miss Allen also said that we're not middle class, so we're already struggling just financially. Then you're calling me every day. I have to leave work. So this just highlights and underscores the fact that a lot of parents, when their children are constantly getting disciplined and constantly not getting the support that they really need, this is impacting them not only emotionally but financially, and it kind of all just works together, right? A lot of times our finances and our emotions are working always in a interconnectedness. So we can go. All right. So yeah, and then next we have this increased respect for parents. So Brianna kind of touched on this a little bit. So when we look at the power of advocacy, right? So when a professional advocate enters in the process, right, a dynamic pretty much just shifted. So we see new things emerging, such as like respect, compliance, and collaboration just overall improved, right? And a lot of parents would see that shift and that dynamic change when they hire an advocate. So and this points towards pretty much systems usually are going to respond to power, not just the needs of the student. And that shows a gap in public education and education as a whole, that we're not really addressing the actual needs of the students. But we do know that leaders must institutionalize that balance through policy, right? So parents consistently shared this, that when the advocate, once again, when they joined this process, a new level of accountability was shown. Ms. Oakes, in the research said that before getting an advocate, she felt like she was just in a room talking to a wall. And she said, I was sitting in a room and I was in a room full of not dummies, as in, but just people that didn't care to hear anything that I had to say. That was the main difference that I noticed, was that having someone else in the room to speak on your behalf. So and we could imagine how belittling that may feel for parents to see that shift when they're hiring someone and now their voices are being heard and their suggestions are actually being considered for the betterment of their child. And one of our last findings that we have is just don't give up, right? So a lot of parents, they have this theme of endurance and resilience, and parents' endurance reframes advocacy as a moral leadership. So we see that parents, they frequently affirm to other parents and share advice and support to other parents to not give up and to do not fight. A lot of parents looked at this as a matter between life and death for their child's success and for how they are going to grow in their success in education and career wise. So it's really important that we know that parents are constantly saying, hey, fight for your children's accommodations and their rights. And if parents refuse to give up on their children, the systems cannot either. So the system will not always be out for your child's best interest, but the parent is. So that is why it's so important that the parent is always advocating for their child to hold the school accountable so their child can thrive. And then we have our implications. So with our implications, we have that school and district-based changes need to improve parental experiences. So we know that we need availability of information communication. So a lot of times there is a lack of proper communication and availability of just things like IEP jargon, like knowing what the language says, knowing how to read an IEP, that a lot of parents do not know these things, and we need to improve the overall parental experience for parents to better know how to advocate for their children. That it doesn't have to be a us versus them mentality, but it needs to be a collaboration and actual support for the child, for the betterment of the child. And then we also have the importance of eliminating intersectional discrimination exhibited by school personnel. So a lot of times, especially for Black neurodivergent children, they have this intersectionality that is just kind of pounding on this oppression, pounding on this discrimination, because a lot of these school personnel are not Black. And then also they don't really have the bandwidth or the toolkit to even accommodate these students that just need an extra tender loving care. They need extra support in the classroom. And then we also have the importance of parental know your rights advocacy strategies, such as related to special education and IEP school discipline. So when we look at a lot of parents, they don't know their rights. That was another thing that we did find in the research, that the parents just didn't know their rights, even when parents had college degrees, even when they had a very affluent occupations, they still did not know the IEP jargon, because even in education as a teacher, every educator is not like in depth trained to individualized education plans. Like as a high school teacher, my concentration is not special education. And we have to notice that. So even if a general education teacher does not know all the jargon, all the things to know, how could we assume that a parent would know those things? So it is very important for parents to know their rights and just those advocacy strategies. And last, we have the importance of parental information and support and resource networks. So it is very important also that we know that parents have support amongst each other. So some parents talked about how they have Facebook groups and how they have these different networks and resource supports, but we need to know these things and continuously highlight these things so we can redefine success for what shared power and thriving for the students looks like. Not just procedural compliance, not just knowing what the words mean, but also how to empower parents in their resource networks for better support for the children. And I will pass it back to my colleagues.
Oh, me. Okay. I'm just going to reintroduce the parents now before we go into the Q&A. I do want to give a quick few minutes. I think we have the time. If anybody has any questions for I'm sorry, to Tribuana, because she has to leave early. Could you just ask her questions now real quick? I don't want to not give you all the opportunity to ask her about anything she may have said. Am I muted?
Nope, we can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you. Know you're doing great. Again, that is a reminder. Tribuana has to go handle the people's business. So if you have any questions for her, please hop in now. Either in the Q&A section, we see questions and praise. If anyone would like to come off mute and speak with grace and velocity, meaning that don't give us a 5-paragraph setup for your question, but if you have a question, you can also share that. If not, then yeah, we can let Tribuana go ahead.
All right. Thank you. You're getting a lot of love, Tribuana. I just see it now, but I don't know if there is a question. Do you want to grab that for me? It looks like it's Kim Irby. I don't know how to, could you see that? I see a hand raised. Am I host or I just view? I don't know. It's Kim Irby.
Let me see. Yeah, it's not showing up. There we go.
Yeah, that's
Ooh.
I clicked it. Yeah.
All right, there we go. There you go. Kim, the floor
Okay.
is yours.
Yeah, my question is in reference to understanding the language of exceptional children. Do you think that we need a special, like, changing the language so that it is parent friendly, like our own, like, dictionary that converts, the terminology to make it more parent friendly, or a tool like that? Do you think that would be beneficial?
Thank you so much, Miss Irby. But yes, I think that's a phenomenal question. Actually, yes, I agree with you. I think a lot of times, and even as educators, because like I said, I'm a social studies high school educator, and when I attend IEP meetings, I know some of the jargon, but I don't know all of it. So I can only imagine for parents that maybe if the case manager or whoever is the child's advocate, especially in a school sense, they should give parents like, hey, these are what the terminology means, or maybe even a scaffold, because we say all day, oh, scaffold for the kids, like bring it down to their level. We should do that for the parents, because and I want to phrase this as a parent coming in and not knowing the IEP jargon is the same thing as giving a doctor giving a parent like their notes. They're like, why would I know how a neuroscientist talks? So I want us to have that same frame of mind. Like IEP is its own thing. It's its own concentration of education. So yes, I think it would be very beneficial to just and actually have like if you ask me, I think we need to have Ms. Pose actually working in the school district. We need to have actual advocates solely for parents. That's not necessarily the case manager, but a higher professional to advocate, so it can be more so a collaborative process, truly.
Looks like there's one more question we'll take before you go, Tribiana.
Yeah.
I wanted to say it's Miss Pope, a Mr. or Mrs. Pope. I can't even with that first name. I'm not gonna try and mess that up. Sorry.
Okay,
I don't know if you can hear. Can you hear me? This is
yep,
Kalila
we can
Pope.
hear. Yep, we got you.
Yes.
Okay. I had the hardest time trying to figure out how to get off of mute, which is why it took me so long. I'm so sorry. So I am a parent, and Tribiana, you made a very good point where, even though you have a college education and you may be an astute member of society and have whatever, you don't know all the jargon for the IEPs. So that I had an IEP meeting for my daughter today who has special needs. She's 6 years old. And ultimately, you have to ask detailed questions. And sometimes it just makes you a little bit at a loss to understand everything because even though she's had an IEP since she was in early childhood special ed, new things come up, and everybody in every school seems to do something a little bit differently. So then you have to relearn and relearn and relearn.
Mm-hmm.
My particular question, though, to you is in regard to the non-school based assessments. Who is financially responsible for those? Is it the parent or the school? And why do they end at age 7 years old?
I could support with that. So essentially, the right to an alternative assessment is a part of federal law. So that's also a piece of knowing your rights and something that is a lot more nuanced. I'm a special educator, so like Trib said, my expertise is in special education on the administrative side. And so under federal law, everybody has the right to an alternative evaluation for special education services. If you request an evaluation, you go through the evaluation process, receive that evaluation, and say your child is not found eligible for services or found eligible for a diagnosis that you may disagree with, or like as some of the family members have talked about, was just not an appropriate assessment or a valid assessment or done thoroughly. And so every parent has the right to an evaluation paid by the school district. And so if you are comfortable with advocating for yourself and your children in that aspect, definitely I would reach out and look into federal IDEA law. Specifically, if you look at alternative assessments, it is a right that a parent has, and it is paid for by the school district.
Okay,
And
thank
just
you.
many times it's also called an IEE, so an independent education evaluation. You may hear that term. That's what we use on the East Coast. the West Coast. Oh, look, you guys get East Coast, West Coast language. But it's the same idea. It's the same concept that she described. Uh,
And what about the age 7 years old? They told me that after she's seven, she no longer qualifies for this assessment. So what is that pertaining to?
that's not true. I
Okay.
mean, I've never heard that. I mean, they have to change. And before we get that, just because I wanted to let Tribiana, because she has to go, and do some stuff for her, get ready for her um, schoolwork stuff thing to get her PhD. But we still have other pieces of the presentation left. So let me go back to that and we can address your
Absolutely.
question. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Sure. Great. Love the conversation. And the parents may answer your question. Who knows? All right. Oh, am I sharing? Yes, I'm sharing. All right. Now what we'd like to do is close out this with the parent's voice because again, someone put this in the chat. I read it real quick because we can't see it where we are, but you nailed it perfectly, and I didn't even realize it. Like the report, we are actually providing the report and then the actual shared experience all together here, and I think that that's powerful because at least for me, I'm used to looking at books and research. And you have to imagine who that looks like or in your mind, but you're actually going to hear from these individuals that went through this, that continue to go through this. So I'd like for them to go ahead and close this out with, why, the findings mean to you. There, you did it. What do you hope to see happen now that this is out here? Like what are your dreams now that this report, the research has been done, and we're going to be giving it to people to and make requests. What do you all want to see happen? Tiffany, you want to go first this time since you went last time? Switch it up.
Sure. For me, it's very eye-opening to really consider the language that is used when describing and categorizing our children. For my daughter, it started happening very early. My child in preschool, I was called probably once every week to come pick her up. I didn't consider that being a suspension. It was, they were saying she won't cooperate. She's in a Christian preschool, so they're saying, one of the things that they assess the children on is obedience, but that's something different in a public school. But she's being disobedient, and I would come and pick her up. And then she moved to another school, and you know how you have those little dividers when they're doing testing, so the children aren't cheating. I think by this time she was first grade, and she got frustrated. She gets high anxiety during tests. So she slammed her divider on the desk, and she was categorized as being violent because she slammed a little card divider on her desk. And but then another student told her that he was going to blow her head off. And the school didn't even call me about that. But I had to pick my daughter up. She was suspended for slamming her card divider on the desk. And when I asked about the threat that my daughter received, they laughed at it. And of course, he's of a different hue. And they said, oh, he had been watching a lot of
Oh,
X-Men and he really didn't mean it. And
you
this
could
is
just
just during
say
the
it here.
same.
You in the space. He was a white boy, a white kid
Yes,
that was able
yes,
So
to
yeah,
make
it
no,
a
we
very
ain't got a
it
violent
filter
was a
here,
threat.
y'all.
white boy,
Let's be real.
yes.
Yes.
And they said that he had been watching a lot of X-Men and they didn't think he meant it. However, this was the same time frame in Virginia when a first grader shot their teacher at school. There was no threat assessment done, nothing. He didn't get sent home. They didn't even think it was anything to worry about. So I moved her to another school. And then that's when her behaviors just continued to escalate because they had read through her file. She was disobedient. She was violent. She was aggressive. And that narrative just started to um, push the suspensions. My daughter had 7 bullying investigations in 30 days in third grade, and it's just the language that characterized her behavior. And then when I started coming in and saying, no, my daughter isn't defiant. My daughter actually has a medical condition called selective mutism, and she doesn't speak when she's in high anxiety. I had to educate the school about what selective mutism looks like in a little black girl because they didn't understand that. And it's just my hope that the findings from this report will get us to start talking more and recognizing when these systems are starting to create narratives around our children that aren't true.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. and Mrs. G, what you got?
Oh no, I feel like Tiffany thoroughly went over that. Ugh, it's so many things. I would really love for people to understand that the school is its own entity, and above all else, they are going to protect themselves. They are going to lie, whether they're going to tell you something or they're going to admit to tell you something. They're going to do things that they said they didn't do, and vice versa.
Yeah, we've had numerous instances where they actually lied and didn't tell the truth about things that actually occurred at school, especially slamming a computer on my daughter's hand. I'm still a little hot about that. But parents really need to learn how to advocate, be prepared to, because they don't have the interests of your kids at heart. They don't care about their dignity. They just, or the mental health. They just worried about themselves.
What really gets me is when you fight for your child. Of course, we are aggressive and we are problem parents. But if you treat me like that, how are you treating my child when I'm not there? It's
And I think one of the things we didn't talk about, and it did come up in the research, and I think it's so important, especially with this group, to talk about it, was that in the research someplace, and I don't remember exactly, but the parents can talk about it, and maybe Ms. Gibson, you can talk about it, was that, this myth that, oh, if all of our educators were Black and we had more Black teachers and things like that, then we wouldn't have these issues. Well, when it comes to systems, that is not true. And I'd love for you all to speak about that, your experiences with Black educators. I know, Goins, you can do that probably a little bit more than Smith because you got some support, a little bit of support. Or we could talk about how the teacher cried in your meeting and took it over. I don't know. But yeah, if you guys just want to talk about that piece too, that'd be great.
my oldest child had a Black special education teacher, and they didn't get along. And that's another thing that sometimes people just don't like each other. And that happens with teachers and children too. And my daughter did not like her special education teacher, and I don't think she liked her. I took my daughter to a meeting and she said, "Don't I ask you if you need help? Don't I ask you if you need anything?" And my daughter looked at her in front of the whole room of people and said, "No." And she didn't have a response to that. And she was also the person who let it slip in a meeting that my daughter was refusing to come to her classroom and was refusing services and never said a word to me. So being Black in this instance did not mean better.
So one of the other things that was in the research paper, lack of communication. We got a lot of that. That's our experience.
I can support. Oh, go ahead,
Okay.
Ms.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I can support with more of what the research said as well as more on that topic. Essentially, like they said, mm, a, a, essentially, regardless of race, there still were problems, and that's why we highlight disability, critical race theory, discrit, that intersectionality between race and disability, because regardless of race, we still have ableism. And so that doesn't go away regardless of race. However, when race is added onto it, when you have a white teacher, there's extra layers where it might be racial, it might be ableism. However, we have to acknowledge within our Black community that there is ableism in the Black community. It's not one of my favorite topics to talk about due to the fact that, I feel like that's like a Black on Black crime kind of argument where they're just going to use that against us to try to say that we're not doing something. And that's not the case. Just the case is ableism is real and is alive regardless of the race that you're in, and that sensitive relationship between school education, the Black parent, and the Black child is definitely something where the skepticism is warranted. Within the Black community, you might have people that don't really agree with a disability because of the history with education and consistently labeling our Black kids with a disability to support seclusion and pushing them out of that school system, pushing them to the school to prison pipeline. And so that was highlighted a lot within the research and really prevalent that regardless of race, we do see disproportionality with the way that special education Black students are treated against other Black students. And so, yeah, definitely. Thank you guys for highlighting your experiences because it's definitely prevalent.
I also wanted to add that my daughter had an experience with a Black administrator who was, I think, the champion of creating the narrative that she was angry and violent and all of these things. And my daughter, in first grade, because she had a meltdown in her classroom, was escorted out of the room. They called the security. And when I asked this Black sister, did you agree with them calling the security officer to escort my 6-year-old Black child out of the classroom? She didn't see a problem with it. And she tried to argue that, oh, she had a relationship with him, and that's why they called him down. I said, my daughter doesn't even know this officer's name. So how can you sit here and say that she had a relationship with him? And I said, you know what the statistics say. You know what the optics look like when she's the only Black child in the classroom and you call security to come and escort her out of the room. So I definitely believe it's a systematic thing. Race doesn't play a part in it unless they're one of those educators in the building who really, really cares about children, and then they're not in the popular crowd.
You guys, thank you. We have 15 minutes for our Q&A, and I have a feeling we're gonna have a lot of questions. So I'm
I
gonna
want to I
stop
want to piggyback on
sharing.
Tiffany. That is
Oh,
very true. We
oh,
we had a
sorry.
special education teacher at our school 2 years ago. She was phenomenal. My child loved her. She did everything that you would want your child to have at school. The experience, the whole 9 yards. They cut her because I don't think she fit in with their
Click.
group.
I see that. I too, and Brianna, it's so funny that you called it Black on Black crime because I literally said that in an IEP meeting in a predominantly Black school, right? Everybody, superintendent's Black, school board's Black, principal's Black, sister principal's Black, everybody's Black. And there's one in this meeting, there's one white guy who was the evaluator. And I'm sitting here looking at these folks to understand why they never updated the evaluation. I was trying to understand why the kid had two IEP goals for executive functioning when in the IEP it said he had dyslexia. And I literally said, this is ridiculous. This is a Black on Black crime. This boy represents your child, your nephew, your grandchild, your nephew, someone in your family. And how do you allow this to happen? You're empowered as a full Black district to do something different and do something better for our children. And I said, this is Black on Black crime. That is so funny you said that. I literally said that in an IEP meeting last week because that's what it was. Of course, they all looked at me like I was crazy, but that's what it was. But thank you guys. Thank you so much. I love your vulnerability. Guys, if we're ready for the Q&A section. If you want to start doing that aspect,
Yeah,
Tafari or
yeah.
Martin.
I
Okay.
can I can hop in and do that. And again,
Great.
yes, fantastic discussion that we're having. Remind me to share a couple of book recommendations with folks too at the end, because again, like I think this discussion is just really, really poignant. So one of the questions that we have here is from Takara Strong. It says, in my state, IEP meetings are not recorded. Do you think it would be beneficial to record the meetings for the benefits of all parties? And then a little bit later in the discussion, also asked, Are educators given courses regarding special education and working with students with special needs? Um, and so if feel free for any of you to take either of those questions. And yeah, let's continue.
Ms. Poe, you can start us off if you want to, or I can jump in whenever.
What was the first part of the question again? I'm sorry.
Sure. In my state, IEP meetings are
Oh,
not
the
recorded.
recording,
Yep.
I got it. Okay,
Yep.
I just needed a prompt. Yeah, it's in our state, it's actually in our regulatory language that parents are allowed to record any meetings that are related to special ed, IEP, 504, manifestation, SEC meetings, all that good stuff. I the reason why I say yes and I don't attend an IEP meeting without recording is because it provides a record, right? It provides a record of what was actually said, and it helps. I always record for my clients. I then give it to them because it helps for many reasons. When you're at an IEP meeting, you're working on a draft IEP, you get the IEP back, you see that there's nothing on there, you can, the things that you talked about aren't on there, you can go back to the recording and be like, hey, this is what we discussed, why isn't it on the IEP? Have them fix it. Or I also use it for dispute resolution issues, when meaning if state complaints, I do file state complaints, and or OCR complaints, not them as much, but sometimes I have to use that record of what was actually said because the information that we got later written down in a prior written notice or on the IEP didn't match at all, and then you tell the school it didn't match and they want to argue with you. So it and then another thing, like for practical use for parents, you know, sometimes when you're at those meetings, you're emotional. You're not able to process everything, or you're hearing things for the first time, or you're emotional. I think it's great for you to be able to go back and listen to them and see what was said. Things that you didn't understand, maybe go back and listen to and get someone to help you understand it better or clarify what was said. So I see lots of value in for several different reasons to record a meeting.
Mhm. And on my end, even if you don't watch the meeting, we're all busy. You guys have children, all of that stuff. But to what Ms. Poe was saying, emphasis on recording, and look into your district's policies because, like the Goins family said and Ms. Smith said that there's always little loopholes. For one, look into your district's notice for recording. A lot of sometimes I've had IEP meetings where we've postponed the meeting because the parent's like, I want to record, and it's like, well, technically, we want 4 days notice to ensure that we have the proper recording equipment in the classroom and all of that fun stuff. So we're gonna redo this because we're gonna reschedule this meeting for next week because we weren't informed that we needed you guys were wanting to record. You're more than welcome to record. However, we just need to make sure we prepare on have the right documentation for it, at least 5 days of notice. So you can get very nuanced in that way as well. I'm real good with, I've been in this special education admin and school districts. I've been in Virginia. I worked in Virginia. It's very interesting over in Virginia. That's why I moved to California. It just a little aligns more with my supports for special ed, but definitely missing my DC folks as well. But yeah, I definitely say ask for a recording and always have it in written notice. Send an email out probably a week or two as soon as you get that invitation. Request that the meeting be recorded because, like Ms. Post said, it might not end up in the notes or on the prior written notice.
Can you ask also about the teacher? She was asking, I don't know exactly, but I think it was what exposure do teachers get about sped ed? Was that the second part of her question to her?
Yeah, it says are educators given courses regarding special education and working with students with special needs?
Yes, minimal supports. So if a teacher has different pathways of going to school, and just like Trib said earlier, different kind of expertise. Special education is its own expertise. So I have in California is a lot different as well than other schools. In California, we're transitioning a special education teacher to an education specialist because California recognizes that special ed teachers are just master teachers and that all of the type of teaching that we do needs to be within every classroom. And so the title is now ed specialist because it recognizes the fact that sped teachers are doing that work that general ed teachers don't have that experience experience to do. California also loves just making words fancy, and we like to sound better than other people. So that's also another reason why we do that. But yes, we do have training. However, it is very minimal training. Especially if you're in the general ed population. If you have a special ed teacher in an SDC classroom, which means that you're in a special education classroom with a special education teacher and your student is away from the general education setting, that special education teacher will have a lot of extensive background and supports with disabilities. But at the same time, we're in a teaching crisis. So you're seeing a lot of more pipeline programs for our teacher training programs. It takes 1 to 2 years to finish a teacher training program. When originally, you'd want to get your bachelor's in education and master's and things like that. So we are seeing these pipeline programs to ensure that we have the bodies in the classroom because we still have students, even though we don't have the teachers to support that. However, they're not as experienced. So I always advocate that we need to have education more high up on our policy agendas and making sure that we are really looking into that because we don't have a lot of teachers. We need to get paid a little more.
Anyone else like to chime in on that one? I think that's pretty solid. Let's move to one more. This one comes from Kim Irby, who was a voice earlier. Kim asked, "What does it mean to over-identify our children?"
Yeah, I can take that. So again, since the inception of special education, Black students, in fact, there's research that showed, and there's Catherine knows it. I wish I would have written the lady's name down, but there's a historical report that talks about like how after integration started, that school districts started developing policies that they didn't exist before that allowed to push out Black students from just having an opportunity to learn. Special ed was one of them at that point. In addition to, of course, some laws that allowed for that. But it's the idea that students are overrepresented as emotionally disturbed. That is not a clinical diagnosis. That is something that educators came up with, gave a list of criterias, and if a student met that criteria, the school could say, "Oh, guess what? You need sped ed services because you're emotionally disturbed." So the over identification of one particular category within special education, that's what we mean. So usually Black students, especially at the time, Black males, were over identified and placed into classrooms, self-contained classrooms that were called ED, emotionally disturbed. I think other school districts may have called it other, what do you call it, ED where you are? Okay, ED or ID, which is an intellectual delay. And that's when the Goins, and I think I don't know, you talked about the Goins kind of talked about that's a great time to get that IEE or alternative assessment. Because again, the testing tools that are used are biased. And if the person that's collecting this data on your child is also biased, there's a chance that the results do not represent your child's cognitive ability to be able to perform in our school settings. So the overrepresentation are in those two particular categories versus like our SLDs or reading disorder categories, right? Those are, for whatever reasons, more considered the more elite kind of disorders, even though they still don't get the services. I don't know, but there's like a hierarchy for some reason of what people label. I'm not going to use the label or are found eligible for. Brianna, do you want to touch on that more?
You did a really great
Did I
job.
take
Just
yeah.
really explaining that that like Miss Poe said, you can go to a doctor's office and get a diagnosis from your doctor. That is not the same thing as a special education eligibility determination. So that's kind of the difference where you think you can go to your doctor, they're like, "Oh, you have ADHD. Oh, you have dyslexia. Oh, you have autism" on a medical diagnosis. The school uses a medical diagnosis to recommend and inform their educational diagnosis, right? And the reason why we don't call it a diagnosis in education is because we are honoring the fact that we're not medical professionals. So we're not diagnosing your kid as an educational specialist, as a special ed teacher. We are essentially saying that your student is exhibiting behaviors and learning the same way that this disability category does. So we can't say your student has autism because I don't have the authority to diagnose. I don't have a medical license, but I can say in the educational setting, your student qualifies under disability because the way that their needs are manifested is under this disability category. So I've had parents argue, I don't want this label of autism, and that was one of those things where technically it's not. It's Sometimes I have Black parents that are really just don't like that diagnosis of autism, and explaining that we don't diagnose as autism. I'm not diagnosing anybody. I'm not a medical professional. I'm just letting you know the best supports to possibly give your kid is going to be under this category because we all have a general consensus in education with what category requires what services. And so we're trying to put your kid into this category in a box, even if under a medical diagnosis, your kid is not that. And so when we say you're over identified in intellectual disability and emotional, I call it emotional dysregulation, not disturbance, because why would we call it a disturbance?
Because the system does, and you can't go in there and ask to be identified as emotional dysregulated. They will laugh at you.
And so
Right?
that's the piece where
Yeah.
we as educators are saying that your student has an intellectual disability and you have an emotional dysregulation or disturbance, even if your medical professional is not.
And we only have like 5 to 7 minutes left.
I'll be quicker with my answers.
Oh no, 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 you're good. No, because these are the kinds of this is the kind of thoroughness that we need. This is what people are appreciating. So no, y'all are doing a fantastic piece. There is a question for the parents that I saw.
Okay.
Let me see if I can pull it up again. It says, parents, um, why did you agree to participate in this study? How do you hope this report will help other parents? And what do you think is beneficial about doing this kind of work or collaborations? Yeah, so like feel free to take any of that. Parent.
Go ahead.
That's there's just so much I could say. This process is very hard. To piggyback off of what you said, when I went through the IEP process with my oldest daughter, they told me that she could only have one diagnosis. So, you go through the binder and they say, what does she qualify for? We're going to give her minutes based off this. They told me she could only have one. So her annual review, she got 3 more sheets.
3. Yep.
So it's like they don't want to give you. They don't want to give you any more services because they're overextended. They don't have enough teachers. They don't have enough resources.
Which is not our problem.
Nope.
That's your problem.
Yep. And it's so frustrating. And as a special ed parent, sometimes it just feels very lonely and very isolating. You feel like no one else is anyone else feeling the way I do? Like, am I thinking constantly at night? Am I worried about the phone call that I need to come, pick her up, or that something happened? Or it's constant. It never stops between appointments and therapies and schools and administration, the IEP process. I just hope through this that other people can read it and realize it's not just them. We're all in the same boat and we all need to get out of this river together.
That was a big question. It had like 3 different pieces in it. Could you maybe say it again, Tafari?
Yeah, sure. No, it's fine. Shout out to y'all asking big questions.
Yes.
It says, for parents, why did you agree to participate in this study?
Why?
How do you hope this report will help other parents? And then it kind of says something about what do you think is beneficial about doing this kind of work?
Okay.
I think that when I started navigating this system with my daughter, I was unsure of what the school what the possibilities were, what could happen. When my daughter was first assessed, she was identified as emotionally disturbed, and that hurt me to my heart. And I even said, this could have lasting impacts for my daughter, and I don't agree with it. And they still said, this is what it is. I went into the meetings and everything was already decided. They already had the plan written up, and basically they were just reading to me what they had talked and discussed about. And I think that knowledge is power, and having this report and seeing that you're not on an island by yourself, that there are other parents going through this, that it's real what you're thinking. And I think I did a lot of that. Like Miss Goins said, I did a lot of, am I going crazy? Am I missing something that everybody else is seeing that I'm not seeing? Because I know my child, I live with her, but they're telling me something that doesn't align with what I'm seeing. And so, my hope is that other parents will find that hope by reading this report and hearing that, they're not going crazy, that it's a very systematic problem that we're facing, and starting to equip themselves to, like Miss Goins said, get out of this river.
People, they really do need to understand that you have to do your research before you go into these meetings. I met a woman at a conference this past fall who told me she's never seen her child's IEP. She said, yes, this was very interesting to me too. She said that they just send her the page where you're supposed to sign it via email, and she just e-signs it or prints it out. I'm not sure, whatever. But I said, so you've never seen it? You've never seen anything, accommodations, minutes, anything? She said, no. And she said, I'm waiting for them to call me now because it's time for them to do their yearly, and they haven't called me. I said, well, you need to call them. And you also need to see your legally binding document that you're signing your name to, that you have no idea what they've written into it. Your son could have like 10 minutes. He's not getting anything. The stories are just
Endless
and scary.
Mind blowing.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, I mean, there's no logical way to land this plane, but I'm gonna try. Because we are at 4 after our agreed upon time together. And of course, you all know that there's so much more to talk about, like Crystal just said. And so we do want to let you know that there's going to be a follow-up to this. And there's a couple of questions that I can kind of loop together from the chat. Some people ask, is the presentation available? Yes. This has been recorded and live streamed. So as soon as this wraps, we'll clean it up a little bit and then re-release it out, and it'll be available for folks to circulate, to share, what have you. I will in a moment let Cheryl ask if like the particular slides will be available, because that was a question that was asked. Of course, as we've talked about here, these are findings. They are part of a larger body of work, a full report release that is going to be coming out on the Dignity in Schools website. March 11th is the tentative date that we've set, but as soon as we have everything squared away, everyone that registered for this webinar, we have your email addresses so we can follow up and say, okay, hey, here's when the report is going to be available. Same thing, when you get it, please, peruse through it, spend time with it, share it. I think that one of the best things we can do as advocates and organizers and just concerned, people in our neighborhoods and communities is to like make these the kinds of conversations that we're having more things about. Just like, and ain't nobody shaming nobody. I like sports too, but like let's have conversations that are just as regular about these kinds of issues, and let's be the ones that kind of lead these kind of conversations in our community and in our neighborhoods, because that's how people become more educated about these things. Because one of the common things that everyone said was, oh, I didn't know this, I wasn't exposed to that, I didn't know there was a word for this kind of thing. And you'll be surprised through conversation how common our experiences are having, which, as you see here from the parents that have talked about, there's a healing value in that. It's like letting you know that you're not crazy. It's letting you know that you are on the money about how these systems are not treating you well. And so that kind of work is just as important as reading the report yourself. Like being an advocate involves the sharing and dissemination of ideas as well. So let's work on regularizing that. Again, March 11th is the tentative date for when the full report will be released. And yeah, I think that those are the things that I want to share. Cheryl, did you want to check in on the question about the slides themselves being available? You're muted.
All right. Thank you. At this time, the slides aren't available. I need to consult with other people because it's a collaboration. It's just not me. So I can't say yes or no to that at this point, but I can get back with you. And if we can figure that out, we can make them available on the website, I guess, also on March 11th, you said,
Yeah.
with the full report, maybe?
Yeah. Sounds
Okay.
good. Yeah. Yeah. That's fine.
All right.
Also, you all, we are going to do there's some conversations about doing a part two around this.
Right.
So of course, like
Right.
all of you all are obviously welcome back. Please come. Folks that see this later know that there'll be some information coming out about a part two, which will take and borrow from even some of the conversations that we had tonight. This conversation of a dictionary for parents, I think, is a very useful kind of tool because one of the things that we've been working on in collaboration with Cheryl and the team that she's worked with is how do we help this content live outside of the report? And so some of those kinds of things about turning them into like toolkits and things to connect and really extend the access to these kinds of ideas is something that is, really
In the
important.
works. Yeah.
So,
Yes.
yep. So stay
I,
in the works for that. That's something we talked about coming maybe sometime in the summer. But again, there'll be a lot of communication. And again, like, um, it is through us collectively sharing our stories and sharing these kinds of things out that people become more and more aware of them. So I think if no one else has any closing words, we can go ahead and land.
I'd just like to thank the panelists for joining me here today with Dignities in School and your willingness to, spend time and share information with all of our organizations. I feel like I'm playing both roles because I'm part of Dignities in School and I'm the panel. So I'm happy that you guys agreed to do this for this particular organization because there's a lot of amazing people that are hearing what we have to say. They support it. They do similar work. So thank you all for the support and thank you all for being here.
Yes, indeed. Well, everyone take care. And again, stay tuned. This is the first of what will be at least three more DSC quarterly conversations. Each one will feature a different subject matter and a different member. So, but if you like Cheryl, like I said, definitely will be back kicking it with us again very soon. So again, take care, y'all. Enjoy the rest of the night. And
Bye-bye.
that concludes
Bye.
our work.
Thank you. Bye.